Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of the Wine Soundtrack podcast. This is Kim Kashmar, and today you are about to hear the incredible story of Neeta Mittal. So, Neeta, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for giving me an excuse to have wine 8:30 in the morning.
Yes, that is true. We are filming at 8:30 in the morning with some wine. We can't not. And what are we sipping on right now?
This is our 100% Sangiovese, inspired by our travels to Tuscany, but specifically Montalcino. So this is actually the Brunello clone of Sangiovese.
Oh, it's a good one to start in the morning. And I don't know why, but it makes me think of and it's not jammy, but it's like I'm having jam on my toast, but it's just wine.
Yes, it's bright cherry, tartness, a little bit of floral. It's beautiful.
It absolutely is. All right, so let's get into what you do at your winery here. So, LXV, can you tell us about the types of wine that you make and your overall philosophy?
Is this the one that you want me to keep short, or is this the one? So LXV is a boutique winery in Paso Robles. We are a Bordeaux house, but of course we have Sangiovese and Nebbiolo because kind of our muse started with Italian wines. And then we have a little bit of Syrah in play because we are in Paso Robles. And we also have a sort of a culinary extension to our experience, which is what we are famous for as well.
It's pretty incredible. We'll get into more of that culinary experience when you taste wines at LXV in a minute, but I want to kind of take a step back. Did you always know you wanted to get into wine, and how did it get started?
So I'm Indian. And we did not grow up with wine, but what we grew up was with flavors. And so what was interesting was when Kunal and I met, and I was studying at Berkeley, he was working in San Francisco, Napa became our thing to do, and wine became our thing to do. And so Kunal, me, and wine, we kind of... it was like call it a trifecta, call it a menage a trois. That's been us for the last 25 years. It's Kunal, me, and wine. It's really it's a pillar of a relationship, really. And we've traveled all around the world seeking wine, but also seeking cultures. Like, that is very important to us. The food culture, the socio-economic culture, and we got so ingrained in the world of wine that it almost became an extension of everything that we were doing even before LXV. Paso happened very serendipitously. Kunal is a pilot, and we accidentally landed in Paso. It's a long story. And he's a pilot by hobby. And we just fell in love with this town. You've been here a few times. There is a fabric here. There's an intimacy here that people feel. It's intimacy with the earth, intimacy with each other. Felt like India, felt like home. And really, I think for us, Paso happened first, and then that was followed by our love for wine and how do we express that within what was going on in Paso at that time. And I think that's how LXV was born.
Paso really is an amazing place. So tell us a little bit about the Armaa vineyard and what you're doing over there with growing, because you have the winery, and where are your grapes coming from for the winery? Are they coming from Armaa vineyard, or is that a separate project?
So LXV, our first vintage was 2010, and what we wanted to do was curate relationships with vineyards. When you start out in the wine industry, when you are a newbie, you have to sort of earn the respect of your peers to allow you to have access to the best grapes. And so that's what we've developed over the last 10 years. And now we have access to some of the best fruit, not only in Paso, but also in Central Coast. In fact, the Syrah that's in front of you, that's a Syrah from Bien Nacido. I think that's a Sangiovese, and that is White Hawk. And then in Paso, we have fruit from G2 North, probably one kind of the hallmark of the best viticulture practices in Paso. And so that's what we've done with LXV for the last 10 years, is develop this amazing relations with amazing growers who are not only just good in good terroir or good AVAs, but also have very conscientious growing practices. That's extremely important for Kunal and me. And along with that, we developed our estate vineyard, which is in the prestigious Willow Creek AVA, and that is its own different expression. We call it Maison Mittal, the House of Mittal. The tasting room will be open hopefully by 2025. Let's see how that goes. And so that will be a completely separate brand, heavily focused on, in fact, singularly focused on Bordeaux. That's Bordeaux coming from Paso, Central Coast, and we are in search of the best Bordeaux terroirs all around the world. We made wine in St. Emilion in the last 2 years, and we are traveling to Tuscany next year. So our love for Bordeaux, it's a little bit, sometimes I think it's impractical, but it's truly passionate, is we will go to the ends of the earth, literally, to find the best terroirs for Bordeaux.
Oh my gosh, I'm smiling just hearing you talk about this because I can tell how passionate you are, and I'm sure everyone here listening can feel the same. It really just resonates through the microphone. Speaking of, Bordeaux and France, was there a moment when you and Kamal really just had a realization that Bordeaux was your thing?
Absolutely. It was interesting. It was on our first trip to Bordeaux, and I envy those days when we did not know much about wine. First impressions made a lasting impression. And I think when you're in the wine world for a long time, jaded would not be a nice word to use, but very few things amuse you. Something has to be absolutely spectacular. But when you're a newbie and you're exploring the wine world, I think something just moves you, I wouldn't say easily, but you're open to it. And I think that was a phase when we were exploring the wine world and we were in relationships. I think Bordeaux happened at a very surreal point in our lives where there were a lot of other beautiful things happening. So it was all of that ecosystem of romance put together. So we first explored the left bank of Bordeaux, and I just fell in love with Margaux. So I always say this, Pauillac has my respect, but Margaux has my heart. And then we went to the right bank of Bordeaux, and Kunal was in love with St. M, and specifically more, he loves the right bank, but Cabernet Franc became his thing. In fact, in Paso, he's kind of known as the Cabernet Franc man, and he loves that. So I think those were those two passions for us. Kunal became like a right bank guy. I became a left bank girl, and to the extent that we kind of duel it out at times. So we made our first white Blanc de Sangiovese, which was a big deal. And now he's like, well, we've made Blanc de Sangiovese, but we have to do Cab Franc. Cab Franc is in his heart. And so this year we did Blanc de Franc. So you'll see how that goes. But yeah, Bordeaux is, it's huge in our hearts. We are inspired by, it's interesting for me personally, Bordeaux is not a wine, it's a legacy. It's a history, it's conversation, it's lessons. The more you really get into why Bordeaux is where it is today, if you go back to the history and you see how this region went through its ups and downs, but they had that very interesting, resilient trade culture that allowed for a great expression of wine. Commerce was so important as a backbone to the development of Bordeaux. And to get those lessons, especially as an entrepreneur, it's important to seek inspirations and lessons in all of this. So Bordeaux has influenced us as a couple and me personally as well.
So it's more than just the wines, it's the culture, it's the, okay, yeah.
Yes. And the food. And the food, definitely. I mean, France, food, it's fantastic. And Bordeaux, I don't know, if it's the art imitates life, imitates art, is if you see the wine, the food and the food culture in Bordeaux, so many inroads into wine and the other way around. And that, LXV is, as much as it is a wine house, we are a huge culinary it's not a hub because we don't do food here, but we are we explorers in the culinary world. And so for us, the food in Bordeaux and how that intertwines with wine so close, that excites us a lot as well.
I think that absolutely resonates. One of the coolest things that they do at their winery here when you do a tasting is they have different spice mixtures that they will coat neutral cheeses with and then pair wines with. So can you tell us a little bit more about the thinking behind that, and tell us about the pairing that goes with the Sangiovese, which is what we have in our glass here?
I'm passionate. I'm talking about Bordeaux, and here we are having Sangiovese, which is what I love about wine. Is it's your love and passion for an expression should not be bound by geography, not at all. So the idea was, we've been wine tasting for years and more, and we had that conversation the other day when you were here. It becomes a monologue where, we as winemakers, we want you to understand, the terroir, the viticulture, the vinification, the expression, and then the extension of what would pair with this. So in the 3 sips that we pour in your glass, literally, we expect you to understand our entire philosophy. And sometimes I feel that's a tall order. And it becomes sort of monologue of us telling you what to experience in this glass, as against when we bring something into the environment like flavors, it becomes a dialogue, because now the person who's tasting with you has a conversation that they can hold, that they can contribute to. So for example, we have I have this Sangiovese, cherry, brightness, acidity, hallmarks of Sangiovese. So we pair it at LXV with this combination of flavors. This has hibiscus, lavender, dry mango powder. So really, when I talk about acidity of wine, especially Sangiovese, it is something you have to talk about in Sangiovese. It's like its DNA, its soul. But a person tasting the wine may or may not understand what acidity means in a wine. They know what tartness is, but what does acidity really mean in a wine? When you bring a flavor like this, hibiscus has a lot of tartness, and then the dry mango powder has a lot of tartness. And so when they now have that with the wine, they get it. They understand the concept of what tartness means in wine. And then we also have some nutritional yeast in this. And this is a Brunello clone. One of the signatures of Brunello clone is a little bit of that earthiness, a little bit of that hint of truffle, if you will, that wet earth forest, if you will. And the nutritional yeast just is that bridge for them to understand that as well. So every wine at LXV, we curate a blend of flavors from around the world. We do not do Indian spices only. Once in a while we'll pull into our Indian inspiration, but these are flavors around the world that we pull in honor of the wine, to elevate the wine, to help people dive deep into the wine. And then when you talk about terroir and that limestone or the clay or the could be the coastal influence or something in the climate that allows for florals to develop. Now, after they've tasted it, when you talk about those things, somehow the dots connect.
Yeah, and everything you're talking about really does enhance the tasting experience, because you're allowing yourself to, like you said, open the dialogue through a very wide sensory experience. Like everyone understands, I know what mango tastes like, so I can taste that in the spice, but how does that interact with the wine? And it helps kind of break down that maybe intimidation that some people might feel with wine. And I think this is also, this experience that you've curated at LXV, that's given you some notoriety, right? You've been named the USA Today Best Tasting Room list. You've been on that. Is there any other notoriety that's come out of that?
Wine Enthusiast just recognized us as one of the top experiences in Paso Robles, and that was a recent honor. And when publications of that stature recognize what you're doing, it matters. But what's been the most important for us has been the notoriety, the support, the exaltation, if you will, that we've received from the people. We've been open for 10 years. Over the last 7 years, we have remained the top-rated wine tasting in Paso Robles, which it's a small tasting room. It's beautiful, but it's a tiny tasting room in downtown Paso. We don't have the sweeping views of the rolling hills, but what we bring is that passion for wine, for food, and then every person who works in the tasting room is either a WSET 2 or a Psalm 2. So we are very serious about if you have taken the time to book a reservation at LXV out of 350, 400 other choices, we take that very seriously, and we make sure that those 90 minutes that you spend with us, which usually goes into about a couple of hours, are a deep dive for you in every which way, and they honor your time and your palate.
So, Neeta, you are one of the first Indian women to own a winery in the United States. How have you brought your culture into the winery, and how does that influence the wines that you create and the experience?
It's interesting. I come from a very small town in India, and so growing up, almost until I came to the US, this area was largely untouched by anything that's Western. So we grew up with very authentic Indian flavors, diverse Indian flavors, and then when I came to the US, it was such a revelation for me, because I come from a town where we did not have, and I'm not kidding you, we did not have cherries. We did not have strawberries. Like, I remember eating a strawberry that was like supposed to be like this delicacy, maybe twice in my life before I came here. And so to be exposed to the wine world, where this depth and expanse of flavor is everything, was so fascinating, because I come from a world of flavors. Especially because my mom is a biotechnologist and a phenomenal cook, and so I think more than the specifics of the Indian culture, what I brought to the table, or what I got excited about, is what am I experiencing? Everything that I do at LXV, everything that Kunal and I do at LXV, it's very authentic to what we love and what we enjoy and what we feel. Paso is a Rhone place, but our heart is in Bordeaux. And so we were like, okay, that's great. We will buy the Rhones that our friends make, but we will make Bordeaux. Of course, it came with a lot of deliberation, a lot of thought, and talking to actually Cal Poly, talking to people in Bordeaux, getting on board a winemaker from Napa who had studied in Bordeaux. So when we went the Bordeaux way, it wasn't just our, okay, we love Bordeaux, so let's do it. A lot of deliberation went into it, which also kind of is inspired or comes from our Indian culture of wanting to dive deep into everything. It's a culture where, as you all know, education is huge for us. And you understanding everything in detail, understanding the implication of everything is very, very important. And so I think that part too of our culture was very important, is that deliberation and the understanding and taking a chance on what we are doing, even with these pairings. A lot of people said, don't do it. It's not classic, because it's not something you do in the wine world. And we said, well, that's great, but we love food. We don't have a kitchen. We are not going to cook food. We are not a restaurant. How do we bring flavors to the table? Because that's what we love. That's what we understand. And that's how these pairings were born. It's just beautiful flavors dusted on cheese. That's it. It has been like that for 10 years, and it works every single time. So I think our culture... there are some visual elements to it. There's some textural elements to it. If you go around our tasting room, there's a lot of that vibrancy, that texture, just like this table. It's from a tree down in Cambria. And so I think there are colors, textures, conversations, depth. But I think the most important, if we were to talk about hospitality or about culture, is hospitality. As I mentioned to you earlier, for me, it's important when people walk into our tasting room, you feel like you're at home. That matters a lot to me. And so we every decision is kind of led by that, because again, with LXV, I want to create something that I'm passionate about. I love, and so it's great because, and our culture, in fact, is extended a little bit also with my experience leading up to LXV in LA as well. I spent almost 8 to 9 years in LA. In some good part of it was in the movie industry, and so storytelling became very ingrained. So it's almost like my culture is a confluence of what I was raised and brought up in India, and also what I experienced in Los Angeles. And in between there was Berkeley, which was just one of those places that gave you the freedom to think however you wanted. And I think that too played a huge role. So I consider myself as an amalgamation of Indian culture, LA culture, with a dash of that Berkeley craziness, just sprinkled a little bit in there.
Where did the name LXV come from?
LXV is 65 in Roman numerals. We are inspired by the 64 sutras, our Indian culture, that fabric. When we talk about the rich Indian culture, it's based on the 64 sutras: music, dance, feng shui, architecture. And for us, the story of our wine is the 65th sutra, hence LXV.
Okay, so let's do some quick facts about your winery. How many cases do you produce?
2023 vintage was 4,500 cases.
What is the size of the Armaa vineyard?
14 acres, but it feels like 40.
So at the Armaa vineyard, that is going to be producing your next line, Maison Mittal. When is that launching?
2025, but the wines are already in the barrel, including the one from St. So we do barrel tastings on request. The tasting room hopefully will be done by 2025.
What is your favorite wine that you make, and what is Kunal's favorite wine that you make?
You know, it's so interesting. Kunal's I can answer in a heartbeat. It's Cabernet Franc as a varietal. As the vineyard, there is our Armaa Estate Cabernet Franc, which is in the barrel, and he swears by it. I kid you not, the lot has been so difficult to farm that it's close to about, if we do the figures, close to $25,000 to $30,000 a ton, just because of the intensity of the farming and the mortality rate on that. But that's how much he loves his Cab Franc. Hopefully it's new wines too, so hopefully it'll get better over time. So Kunal's is Cab Franc in a heartbeat, and another Cab Franc from G2 North, which is a prestigious vineyard in Willow Creek. And for me, it's one of those things where I don't know, it's to me, every wine speaks a different language. My Sangiovese is my culinary. My Left Bank Bordeaux wine, which is our Cab Franc Merlot Petit Verdot, that's my sort of Zen wine. Our Merlot Cab Franc blend, which is our ode to Right Bank of Bordeaux, that's my wine to have with like friends when we are brooding and having like these serious conversations. And then we have a reserve cab called Meso, which we have literally curated 2 wines. That's the Syrah from Bien Nacido and the Cab for fine dining. Like, we have created wines for fine dining. So if we are going to a restaurant or we are talking to a restaurant to carry our wines, that's my pride. That's the best of the best. So it depends upon the language, the conversation. But if I had to, no, I'm not going to pick actually. No, I'm not going to pick, no.
It's a hard question for a winemaker, but I always like to see what you say. Yeah. Speaking of fine dining, are any of your wines in restaurants in California or in the world?
We just started reaching out into the market. So we are at the 2 Michelin star restaurant on Rodeo Drive called Gucci Osteria. We are at Etan, which is a 2 Michelin star chef, Srijit. We are in 3 restaurants in Paso, Le Petit Canet, in Bloom, and then we are in Lisa Dahl's restaurants in Sedona. So all these have happened. They have come out of relationships that we have developed with people because we love fine dining. And then starting in about a couple of months, we will seriously start going into the market and showcasing our wines to wine buyers. So it's going to start in a couple of months. But what we're really excited about is, instead of saying this is our wine that's the best, which is our reserves at LXV, we literally created wines for fine dining, which is, we call it the Meso line. So it's Meso by LXV, and it's Cab, Syrah, Blanc de Sangiovese, which is a white Sangiovese, and then very soon there's going to be a Cab Franc in there.
So before we close out of the Wine Soundtrack podcast, we usually like to play a game, Neeta. A lot of times it's asking our guest to pair wine with movies or a song, but we've been talking so much about food that I think we should talk about the culinary experiences and your favorite pairings. So when you're drinking your wines, what are some of your favorite pairings?
It's interesting. For me, wine and food, it's like it's a palette, and then it really is like a spice box. And so, what can come out of wine and food is so different depending upon the occasion. There are times when you create something savory, sometimes sweet, but the biggest misconception is wine pairs with the protein, and actually wine sings with whatever is the top note in the dish. So I say this, give me any wine in the world, give me any protein in the world, I'll figure out how to create the bridge. We did a thing for our club where we did our steak with our rosé, because every club shipment at LXV goes with the wine, the spices, and then the recipes. A little bit of plug for our club. And so what in that club shipment, we sent recipes of our steak with a Cab, and the rosé with, or rather the steak with our rosé, and the lobster with the Cab. And I had club members calling in saying it's a printing mistake, and I said, no, trust me, do it. So for me, if it starts with the wine, if it is about the wine, if that's what you're studying, that's what you're celebrating, have the dish a little bit understated than the wine. And the opposite, if it's about the dish, if you're making a phenomenal fillet, or if you're doing a Gordon Ramsay's, I'm forgetting, Wellington. If you're making a beef Wellington, then if that's the star of the night, have a wine that doesn't overpower. It should be, are you telling the story of the wine that night, or are you telling the story of that dish that night? And make sure the other is a support, is a good ally, but does not take over the story.
I'm really intrigued about the lobster and Cab. What are you putting on the lobster? Is there like a spice or, butter?
Yes, so what we did was we poached the lobster in butter that had a lot of herbs to it. And that's what created that bridge. That's what created that bridge between the lobster and the Cab. Also, we used a lot of lemon as well, and so really it was interesting to see the interaction with the brightness of the dish with the silky, beautiful Cab, and then we had the herbs that created the bridges with the flavors in the Cab.
Oh man, so a recipe comes with each wine in your shipments for your club?
Yes, along with the paired flavor pairings. So it's wine, spices, recipes. I think we are the only culinary true wine club that does this for every single shipment.
Wow, so you send little spice packets then?
Yes, we do.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, speaking of your wine club, where can people find your wines? Where can they join? And where can they follow along with you on your journey?
So our website is lxvwine.com. I invite everyone to come give the club a try. Please mention Wine Soundtrack, and I'll make sure that we extend a greater hospitality to you as a new club member, especially if you're going to give it a try without ever stepping foot inside here. But that'll be my commitment to make sure that you at least get to experience our wines, and then you can stay on from there. So give us a call. It's 805-296-1902, and find us on Instagram, find us on Facebook. I think we are fabulous at what we do in the cellar, in the vineyards, in the tasting room. We have a lot of work to do on social media, but whatever we put out there, I hope it connects genuinely with people.
So thank you, Neeta, for your time and for sharing your story. It has been such a joy to talk to you.
And thank you to Wine Soundtrack. I'll tell you how important these podcasts are to put stories out there for small wineries such as us. We do not have the marketing budgets. We do not have the advertising budgets, but our stories will carry through. So we need avenues as such. So thank you so much for what you guys do in helping us connect with somebody across the globe practically. So we truly appreciate the role you play in the wine industry as well.
It's our joy and pleasure. Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you next time on the Wine Soundtrack Podcast. Bye.
Namaste.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.